right. This is going to be a very interesting topic to discuss. The making of a detransitioner. Elisa Ray Shoup was a weapon in the hands of TERFs and Christian conservatives. Now, over 2,600 pages of leaked emails help tell her story. It's always funny, isn't it? People online think they have this idea of who you are and what kind of person you are and what really happened and stuff like that until all the leaked emails come out. All the leaked DMs come out. And then, usually at that point, it's too late. People bully other trans people into suicide, and all of it was for what? When the truth comes out, tons of people feel bad. But they say, oh, well, too bad, nothing I can do now. That's disgusting. All right. On Wednesday, March 8th. Let me zoom in a little bit now. Oh, okay. On Wednesday, March 8th, Mother Jones broke the news of a secret working group that had collaborated to craft anti-trans legislation targeting youth health care and spread it to multiple states. The existence of that group, which included numerous elected officials, members of conservative Christian policy groups such as the Family Policy Alliance and the Alliance Defending Freedom, and representatives from anti-trans feminist group Women's Liberation Front, oh God, we love that one, right? Among others, proved that the current onslaught of anti-trans legislation was the result of a coordinated campaign. Within hours of the Mother Jones story publishing, a 2,600-page PDF archive of the leaks was posted online. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of these. 2,600 pages is a little bit more than I have time for right now. But I will post a link to the article in the description on YouTube. So if you're interested in digging through some of those emails and making posts of your own, feel free. You'll be able to find the link to the article down there, and there you can find the link to this PDF archive, okay? That archive is substantial, and it is damning. But the public leaks are not the whole story. When the archive was posted, I had already been reading through the leaked emails for several days. The leaker, a trans woman and former detransition activist named Elisa Ray Shoup, had reached out to me to offer access, and I had come away with a whole other story. The full archive, sent to me and other journalists, contains every email Shoup sent or received from both of her two email accounts between 2017 and 2023, the years when she was most active as a member of the organized anti-trans movement. Sorry, I just have to catch my breath here for a second. It's hard for me to breathe with my jaw wired shut, so. There are years of media, legislative, and tactical strategies outlined in these emails. There are conversations in which some of the most well-known TERFs in the movement coordinate strategy and brainstorm talking points. It is a playbook for how anti-trans organizations operate and a compressed history of how the TERF movement joined forces with the Christian right to create the current moment. More important... Oh, thank you, Pink Girl, for the follow. Really appreciate that. Most important, it is a record of how Elisa Ray Shoup was crafted into a weapon, how her narrative was established, edited, and eventually taken out of her control, even as her name appeared on testimonies, Supreme Court briefings, and highly circulated op-eds. This is the making of a detransitioner. More like her or being made every day. Elisa Ray Shoup transitioned in 2013. It did not go well. Her hormone levels were improperly monitored and she wound up with blood clots and painful skin reactions to her estrogen patches. Still, in her early transition, she presented a positive face. Her background: she was a retired military veteran, a decorated Sergeant First Class who received transition care from the Department for Veterans Affairs, made her an interesting story. She was famously the first person in the U.S. to be legally designated as non-binary. In a 2015 article for the New York Times, Shoup wrote that, quote, radical conservative politicians and religious groups routinely attack her very existence with legislation to deny basic human rights, such as a bathroom that matches my gender identity. End quote. By 2017, Shoup was working with the LGBTQ2S plus civil rights organization Lambda Legal. By the way, just a little heads up, if you don't know what 2S is, that's Two-Spirit. Okay? Two-Spirit. That's an ancient, well, I don't want to say ancient, but it's a Native American tradition that a lot of trans people find themselves with. So definitely read more about Two-Spirit people if you're not fully aware of where that comes from, okay? She had been profiled by queer-friendly publications as recently as 2016, but it was becoming increasingly clear that something had shifted. In a January 2017 email with New York Magazine writer Alexis Soulos-Ray, still bad with names, famously bad with names, which was intended for Soulos-Ray's book Finding Normal, Shoup wrote, "I never thought of myself as a female. I was led to believe that, and claimed that medical transition can't alleviate gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is a donkey chasing a carrot in a program the Twisted Shrinks created that's fueled by societal norms and sex stereotypes." She told Soulos-Ray that she totally agrees with a lot of the hardcore feminist ideologies about biological sex and gender, and lamented the fact that trans rights activists have depicted TERFs as mortal enemies. Soulos-Ray may not have recognized these talking points, but someone else soon did. By May 2017, Shoup had been offered a role as a guest blogger at Gender Identity Watch, run by the notorious trans exclusionary feminist Kathy Brennan. She was also published on the blog by the Youth Trans Critical Professionals, run by Lisa Marciano, who also sometimes operated under the pseudonym Lisa Bell. Marciano was also working closely with an activist known variously as Denise, Marie, and Jeanette, though Marciano referred to her simply by the name of her website, Fourth Wave Now. This was the deep end of the TERF pool in the United States. Brennan's loud, corrosive online presence, as per Jezebel, did more to push a noxious brand of anti-trans feminism on the internet than any other person in the country. Over 8,900 people signed a petition asking the Southern Policy Law Center to classify Gender Identity Watch as a hate group, partly due to Brennan's habit of using the blog to out and shame specific trans people. Marciano and Fourth Wave Now, along with a physician and researcher named Lisa Littman, were instrumental in creating rapid onset gender dysphoria, ROGD, the debunked yet widely cited theory that youth transition is caused by social contagion. That's something interesting to talk about too. Kathy Brennan's loud, corrosive online presence, as per Jezebel, did more to push a noxious brand of anti-trans feminism on the internet than any person in the country. Wow. Powerful quote there. These early communications provide a first-hand look at how TERFs pushed talking points into the mainstream. Lambda Legal had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Shoup's politics, and when her anti-trans writings came to light, they dropped her entirely. Shoup wrote to Brennan asking for sympathetic media contacts, and Brennan wrote back with a list. The first name on it was Michelle Goldberg, who lamented the plight of TERFs in a 2014 article for The New Yorker, and has since been criticized for transphobia in her column at The New York Times. Goldberg denies any close relationship with Brennan, telling me via email that she thinks she spoke to her in 2014 for a piece she was researching for The New Yorker, but didn't end up quoting her, and that she doesn't remember their conversation. When self-described gender culture war reporter Lisa Sellen Davis wrote another Times editorial widely criticized as transphobic, Marciano reached out to arrange a phone call between Davis and Shoup, noting hopefully that Lisa has been met with Chase Strangio and Kate Bornstein looking for common ground, but is looking for other trans perspectives as well. Shoup says she and Davis stayed in touch after the phone call and was able to show me an email exchange dated December 2022. Not all of these attempts paid off. In February 2019, Shoup contacted Abigail Schreier, author of the book Irreversible Damage, which argues that the transgender craze is seducing your daughters and causing vulnerable cis girls to transition due to social contagion. Though Schreier proposed a phone call, not much seems to have come of that conversation. Shoup made a slightly more successful pitch to podcaster Katie Herzog, excuse me, who reached out to Shoup multiple times via Twitter DM asking for interviews, but did not end up using any of Shoup's quotes. In both cases, Shoup says the roadblock was the same. Schreier and Herzog were invested in selling detrans women, not males. People like me are inferior sales tools, Shoup tells me in an email. Although some people will sympathize with narratives like the one that Laura Ingraham peddled, that I'm mentally ill and instead of giving me therapy, the VA gave me hormones, it's not as good of a seller as a damaged young woman. Herzog disputes Shoup's characterization as to why she didn't include Shoup's comments in her story, stating that in an email to Extra that she didn't include Shoup over concerns for her mental health. Finding anti-trans narratives that would sell to the general public was a constant concern for this crowd, and Shoup says it didn't matter much if the narratives were based in fact or not. Marciano, for instance, eagerly watched the spread of the ROGD theory. Trans feminist writer and researcher Julia Serrano has already written a takedown. She exulted in one August 2018 email. Shoup suspects Marciano's role is larger than the public knows. Marciano never explicitly said she is the inventor of ROGD, but the evidence points to her, and she's listed as a contributor to the Lisa Littman study on PLOS1. I don't know what PLOS1 is, but whatever. My opinion is that Marciano and the Fourth Wave Now folks are behind the ROGD study, and Littman merely fronted it for them to make it appear unbiased. The founder of Fourth Wave Now, in an email to Extra, denies Shoup's allegations, calling them completely untrue. Examining the archive, it seems that Marciano had a hand in advancing multiple similarly bogus theories. On two separate occasions, for instance, she asked Shoup for help in arguing that transition causes teen suicide. Comparing notes, we are noticing that the only suicides of trans kids that we hear about are among those kids who are being supported and affirmed and are transitioning or have transitioned. Leila Alcorn being the only exception, Marciano wrote in the first email dated October 15th, 2018. Since there are no national statistics that would allow us to test the hypothesis that transition may increase suicidality, we want to try to mine news reports to see what they show. Are you able to put your hands on as many reports of trans teen suicide stories as possible? Marciano was still looking for those stories in October 2019, when she again wrote to Shoup that I, quote, would like to write something about how the trans narrative is actually making kids feel suicidal, how the suicidality is because of transition, or perhaps being told that if they are trans, they will feel suicidal. I don't know about that. I want to take a minute to pause and think about that, because in my experience, I've never felt suicidal just because I'm trans. And I don't think that is the case for a lot of other trans folks. I think a lot of times it comes from being forcibly detransitioned, or not being supported by your family or your friends, or, some other kind of social problem that trans people often suffer, because we're all looking for acceptance, and it's hard for us to find that even within our own community. Excuse me. That she struggled to find data is no surprise. Multiple studies show that transition significantly reduces suicidality among trans and non-binary youth, with different studies giving rate reductions ranging from 40% to a staggering 73%. It's also not common for psychologists or researchers to start with a firm conclusion and work backward to cherry-pick the evidence, which, as Marciano herself wrote, would have been impossible to collect. Still, it was all part of the game, which was less about truth and more about finding the right emotional buttons to push in order to provoke an anti-trans backlash. Despair from societal tone and legislations, familial and close friend rejections, becoming a social pariah. Yeah, Morena, you've got it right on the head. That's exactly what it is. And that's exactly why it's so important for us as a community to stand together. You know, to not constantly repeat these several times debunked theories about each other, or to go online and spread rumors about other people or anything like that. It's important for us to stick together. Because we truly are, in some cases, all we have is each other. She just kept working at different things until they found something that works, Shoop tells me in a phone call. It was just like endlessly trying something. Does this thing work? Did this get traction? And if not, move on to this. Shoop was a valuable player in this game because, as a detransitioner, she could lend credence to other people's theories by claiming that they accurately described her. One major theory was autogynephilia, a term coined by gender-critical sexologist Ray Blanchard to argue that at least some trans women are fetishistic men who gain sexual satisfaction from seeing themselves as female. In our phone call, Shoop refers to working with Blanchard to get the autogynephilia diagnosis. I ask her what she means, assuming that she got the idea from his work. No, Shoop said. He told me how to get diagnosed. By January 2019, Shoop had publicly renounced her non-binary identity and publicly identified as male, and by the end of that year, she had legally changed her name from Jamie, the chosen name for her first transition, to James. In a February 2019 email, Shoop wrote to Blanchard that she wanted a diagnosis of autogynephilia and asked how to get one. Shoop was not a patient of Blanchard's, just a fellow traveler in anti-trans circles, but Blanchard responded in detail. Your psychiatrist could consider 2 diagnoses, he wrote. The first is transvestic disorder. 302.3, I guess this is citing... What's the thing? The thing about mental health disorders and shit like that? Whatever. And either or both of its 2 specifiers with autogynephilia and in full remission. He warned her that the other diagnosis, gender dysphoria in adolescents and adults, was less desirable and encouraged her to share his letter with healthcare providers. I have no opposition to your sharing the contents of this email with any psychiatrist you might consult in the future or anywhere else you might see fit. In 2019, Shoop met one of the movement's most controversial leaders, Kara Dansky, board chair of Wolf, and the woman widely credited with bringing TERFs into the right wing. Shoop maintained a friendly correspondence with Blanchard, as she did with many other movements of the burgeoning US-based TERF movement. It was in March 2019 when she met one of the movement's most controversial leaders, Kara Dansky, board chair of Wolf, and the woman widely credited with bringing TERFs into the right wing. Dansky's willingness to openly align with right-wing groups such as the ADF made her a polarizing figure in TERF circles. Brennan openly loathed her, but it had also given her access to forms of political power that eluded her peers. The loose, informal network of TERFs was no match for the organized firepower and well-funded think tanks of the Christian right, and Dansky seemed to know it. My instinct is that it will be the detransitioners, parents, and athletes who will break this open, not radical feminists, Dansky wrote to Shoop in that March 2019 introduction, and I am okay with that. Shoop was open to working with conservatives and had been cultivating her own contacts at the ADF since at least 2017, when she spoke with senior counsel Gary McCaleb about changing the gender markers on her documentation. Still, beginning in 2019, those ties became much more important. This was due in part to another subject discussed in the Dansky emails. In an email dated March 13th, 2019, Shoop complained, I guess. Right? Yeah, I think that's a typo. I think that's a typo right there. Shoop complained that the Social Security Administration required her to file a gender change when she detransitioned. You want to sue them? Dansky wrote. I wonder if this might be something the ADF would take on if you're willing to work with them. Sasha says, I've never felt suicidal purely from dysphoria, but it's often a contributing factor in my darkest moments. Yeah. I agree. And I think that's the experience a lot of people have, right? That's the experience that we all share together, is that it's not purely just dysphoria that makes us suicidal, but it is a large contributing factor on why we feel this way, right? Oftentimes, people take their own lives not because they want to, but because they want whatever external forces are causing that pain to stop. And they don't feel that there's another way out. That's number one. And it would do us all a lot of good if we would all stop trying to get each other to kill ourselves. Okay? Can we do that? Can we agree that the more trans people there are living in the world, the better all of us will be, regardless of whatever your beliefs are? The more visibly trans people there are in the world, the better the world will be for us. Okay? Let's agree on that. Please? I don't know why it's so hard. Why it's so hard to get just a single consensus here in this community. It shouldn't be that difficult. I'm not asking for much. All right. Lawsuits were a key part of anti-trans strategy from the start. Court proceedings had been instrumental in rolling back trans rights in the UK, for example, in the much-publicized Bell v. Tavistock case, where political detransitioner Keira Bell sued the Tavistock Clinic for prescribing puberty blockers to her as a minor. Shoup had been floating the idea of suing someone for the cause since at least 2017, with vocal encouragement from her TERF colleagues. I know people who would testify. I believe that Ken Zucker would, Mike Bailey perhaps also. And if they can't, they will know people who can. Marciano wrote in November 2017, adding, "I'm going to have a lot of resources for you on this. Really. You let me know when you are ready, and I will start introducing you to people." Shoup's lawsuit, as it eventually took shape, resembled the Bell case in some respects. She alleged that the Department of Veterans Affairs had been hasty in providing her with gender-affirming health care, and claimed that her mental health issues, which included PTSD and borderline personality disorder, or BPD, should have disqualified her for treatment. The difference was that in 2013, when she began her transition, Elisa Shoup was nearly 50 years old. This would have been a detransitioner suing a branch of the U.S. government on the grounds that it was unethical to provide gender-affirming healthcare to adults. In this respect, the case would have clarified and advanced the goals of the broader anti-trans movement, not only to prohibit youth transition, but to forbid transition at any age. And if you're a follower of Aaron in the Morn, Aaron Reed, the only other good Aaron on Twitter, no, I'm just kidding. You'll see that. You'll see the pattern, right? You'll see that take place. States that have these prohibitions on youth transition often move then into, okay, well, we don't want adults to be able to transition either. It's very common. Just look at Tennessee. What's happening in Tennessee? What's happening in Kentucky? Shoup's closest ally in this quest was her attorney, Bob Sullivan of Shoemaker and Sullivan. In a March 12, 2019 email, Sullivan introduced himself to Shoup as a faithful Catholic who tries to use his legal skill to build the kingdom of God, and promised that he would be more thorough and aggressive than an attorney who did not understand the evil of gender ideology. The evil of gender ideology. Your case is going to need some medical expert testimony. I may have access to some experts who a non-Catholic and a non-Christian may not know, Sullivan wrote, reminding Shoup that the average psychologist, psychiatrist, or medical doctor is not going to want to lift a finger to help you. Even if physicians or psychiatrists would not merit in Shoup's claims, the ADF surely did. In a March 22, 2019 email, Gary McCaleb wrote to both Sullivan and Shoup saying that he called Bob Sullivan. He responded to me most graciously by email earlier this week. I'll do all I can to help him with this. In the ensuing correspondence, McCaleb assisted with medical records and documentation, was made privy to Sullivan's legal strategy for the case, making him kind of a silent partner. The way it seems to work is ADF will evaluate a lawsuit and fund it if they like it, but it's often similar to the Bob Sullivan situation, Shoup tells me in an email. They don't have the bandwidth to be licensed in every state, so they have a network of lawyers in each state that will do their filings. Then ADF pulls the strings from afar and shows up as the big guns at certain moments. Shoup had been active in the anti-trans movement for years, but her lawsuit, which Sullivan called a formal step to take down the gender rights movement, stood to make her a key asset. Shoup entered the big leagues. She also lost control of her own life story. At the beginning of her gender-critical career, Shoup's public voice was more or less her own. That is, she actually gave the interviews and wrote the blog posts that appeared under her name. As Shoup entered the world of the Christian right, however, her voice was increasingly retooled or outright manufactured by her handlers. Sullivan quickly took over Shoup's public image, instructing her to refer all requests for interviews or public appearances to him. In an email chain dated April 2019, he told her not to talk to a Washington Post reporter he deemed trans-friendly and directed her to what he called good Catholic media sources. In another April 2019 email, Sullivan provided Shoup with what he called an outline for an op-ed, along with instructions for pitching. You should shop it to the main liberal papers, offering it to each one for 24 hours before offering it to a new one. After about 4 or 5, you could then offer it to some more conservative papers until you get one to bite. The outline provided by Sullivan was a full essay of 1,609 words. One sentence was typed in red, indicating that Shoup should fill in the details herself. Shoup's other allies were also eager to use her name. On September 10, 2019, Roger Brooks of the ADF wrote to request help with Schwartz v. City of New York, an ADF-backed lawsuit aimed at overturning New York City's ban on conversion therapy. What Brooks needed, he said, was a 700-word op-ed conveying 2 points. 1, you were horribly lied to and cheated when medical and mental health professionals failed to give you counseling and to help you achieve comfort with your natural sex, and instead encouraged and supported transition. And 2, you and others who choose to detransition need wise mental health counseling as you go through that process, and a law like New York City's that censors your conversations with those professionals that you choose to ask for help is an outrage and a cruelty. Again, Brooks wanted Shoup's name on the op-ed, but he did not want her to write it. ADF has some excellent writers familiar with the length and style that appeals to op-ed page editors, who could take even a very rough sketch or outline of thoughts from you or just talk with you and then create a draft that I think you'll be very happy with. It wasn't just essays. The manufacture of Shoup's voice sometimes included court testimony. The Family Policy Alliance called on Shoup to testify on behalf of a Maine bill, HB 755, which prohibited the advertising, offering, or administration of therapy to minors for both sexual orientation and gender identity. Shoup sent the testimony via email to Public Policy Manager Stephanie Curry, who sent it back with edits. At the time, however, Shoup welcomed this assistance. In fact, she needed it because her own ability to write was compromised. While her career as a detransitioner took off, Elisa Ray Shoup fell apart. In her career as a detransitioner, there was one thing Elisa Ray Shoup had not yet done: detransition. She went by James, she used he/him pronouns, yet she kept taking estrogen, even as she publicly decried its use. Her lawsuit changed that. The VA stopped providing health care, abruptly cutting off her HRT access. The other gender-affirming providers would not take her on as a client, fearing, reasonably enough, that she might sue. The loss of her HRT, combined with the pressure of her increasingly high profile, caused Shoup's mental health to deteriorate rapidly and severely. Her breaking point came after a highly trafficked op-ed at the Daily Signal, in which she called herself a mentally ill autogynephile and repeated that, quote, I should have been stopped from transitioning, but out-of-control transgender activism had made the nurse practitioner too scared to say no. Being put into conversion therapy, she wrote, would have protected me from my inclination to cross-dress and my risky sexual transgressions, of which there were many. In the days after the op-ed was published, the reality of how I portrayed myself set in. Shoup writes to me in an email. She believes, not without reason, that the whole world sees her as a pervert and a lunatic. I'd destroyed my life. The bridge back to being trans was burned. Shoup tried to update her advance directive so that doctors would not be allowed to resuscitate or put her on life support. In the process, she told her social worker, I had been, staring at the Valium bottle, thinking about overdosing. I'd been staring at kitchen knives when I opened the drawer and thinking about stabbing myself. In late April 2019, Shoup was committed to a psychiatric ward. Shoup was open about her mental health struggles at the time. In her emails to Curry, she mentioned needing help with her testimony because she was on a high dose of Valium. When Brooks asked her to work with a ghostwriter, she accepted, citing serious mental health issues that caused my writing to be a gift that comes and goes. Sullivan and Curry were both privy to the full account of her commitment. Yet, when Sullivan engaged with Shoup's mental health, his approach was transactional. Shoup sent Sullivan a partial manuscript in which she disclosed that she had been sexually abused by a male relative. He wrote back that the background of mental illness is something many people need to understand. I think it would need to include even more background, such as some idea, though not in detail, of the abuse you suffered as a child and how that likely triggered your interest in cross-dressing. Curry was more sympathetic, at least on the surface. So much about your journey seems to be a loss of control from people stealing it, hijacking it, co-opting it for their own nefarious purpose, selfishly and without regards for your well-being, she wrote. Yet the Family Policy Alliance continued to contact Shoup for testimony on anti-trans legislation. Privately, Shoup spoke in terms of duty. The parents of these kids also depend on me, she wrote to Sullivan. They're telling their kids, look, Jamie is telling you this stuff is not only not real and harmful to your health. The media largely won't let these mothers speak, but they're more than willing to wield me like a sword, so I'm their voice. Yet increasingly, all Shoup needed to be was alive, conscious, and willing to sign any transphobic statement that was put in front of her. The persona of James Shoup was more powerful and visible than ever, but the life and health of Elisa Ray Shoup increasingly did not matter. Shoup's lawsuit against the VA fizzled out in October 2019. Sullivan strongly preferred to file in Florida, thinking he would get a better verdict, but was unable to find any local attorneys willing to help him prosecute the case. By that time, Shoup was on to her next project, helping Wolf, the Family Policy Alliance, the ADF, and more to draft a bill banning gender-affirming healthcare for minors to be presented in South Dakota by Representative Fred Deutsch. Deutsch? Deutsch? No, it's Deutsch. I'm pretty sure it's Deutsch. The work group's emails are public, Shoup said. Shoup said a lot of ugly stuff in them. She was particularly vehement on the topic of other gender-critical trans people. Unless they've taken formal steps to reclaim their birth sex and denounce gender ideology, please don't endorse or indulge these persons, she told the group, allowing gender-critical trans adults to testify. She told Deutsch in an email, in a March 2020 email, was literally like having people testifying, don't do this, even though I'm doing it because it's life-saving. During my phone call with Shoup last week, I quote that line back to her. She too was seeking HRT at the time. She knew that gender-affirming healthcare was life-saving because she had become suicidal when she lost access to it. It is the question I still can't wrap my head around. How could Shoup try to ban something for others if she knew that losing it would kill her? There's a long silence on the other end of the phone line. I don't have an excuse for that, Shoup says eventually. There's no excuse for that. There is no excuse, but maybe there are reasons. People with BPD are prone to splitting, seeing things as either pure good or pure evil. Shoup thinks that her disappointing early transition combined with her BPD caused her to believe that if transition wasn't an absolute good for her, then it was an absolute evil for everyone. She's working on that, she says, owning her experiences and not projecting. Yet, if Shoup's narrative in 2019 was that she was too mentally ill to transition, the narrative in 2023 can't be that she is too mentally ill to detransition. Both stories rob Shoup of her agency. Shoup made choices, and it seems to me that one of the things driving her was very simple. The anti-trans movement made Shoup feel important to someone, or many someones. Being used made her feel necessary. During our phone call, she recalls the night that the Daily Signal op-ed went live. I sat there at my screen watching these high-powered Twitter accounts, a lot of them anonymous with tens of thousands of followers, tweet it one by one. It was an orchestrated event. Less than 24 hours later, Fox was on the phone going, "Hey, we want you on Laura Ingraham tonight. We'll send a car to pick you up." That would be a big moment in anyone's life, and it was particularly huge for a middle-aged veteran living on disability. Shoup, for what it's worth, agrees with this. "I'm just sitting at home, adrift every day," she tells me. "So, what is it like when somebody like Marciano sends me on a new mission? I got something to do. I'm useful now. I'm no longer this loser on disability. I'm a useful person to a movement." There's a long history of extremist movements recruiting damaged and isolated individuals to do their dirty work. Yet Shoup's crusade wrecked her life, and in the end, the movement that elevated her also chewed her up and spat her out without hesitation. There was no big "fuck you, I'm out" moment for Shoup, no definitive point when she knew it was over. The tide just turned on her. A fellow TERF named Karen Davis started publicly attacking Shoup for her supposed autogynephilia. Shoup says she received death threats. I burned bridges on both sides of the aisle, so at this point, I'm just all alone in my life. I was gradually waking up to the fact that, I was just a useful idiot. There are two words that I would use. I got the vibe that they wanted me to help them. They wanted me to use them, but they couldn't trust somebody like me around their kids. She does not expect things to get easier now that she's leaked the emails. I burned bridges on both sides of the aisle, so at this point I'm just all alone in my life, she says. The person she's paying attention to is now an 18-year-old named Chloe Cole. Cole, who recently filmed an interview with Jordan Peterson and has been thanked by name in Ron DeSantis' Florida State of the State address, is another detransitioner, and as Shoup has exited the scene, Cole's star has been steadily on the rise. Shoup worries that Cole is being manipulated. She thinks Cole's mental health might be worse than she lets on. She's like I was. She is a younger clone of me, Elisa Ray Shoup says. My worry is what's going to happen to her when all the attention is withdrawn. Update: after the story was published, Katie Herzog contacted Extra by an email disputing Elisa Ray Shoup's characterization as to why Shoup was left out of a story by Herzog. The founder of Fourth Wave Now also reached out and, in an email, denied Shoup's assertion that Lisa Littman fronted an ROGD study. Those sections have been updated to include those responses. I mean, this is what people like me have been saying the whole time, is that these detransitioners, these people are being used by these media outlets that say, "Oh, I have your best interest in mind. You should trust me. You should listen to me." They're just using you. You just get used by these people and then chewed up and spit back out, just like the article said. And it's sad. It's sad that all these people want to do is just push a narrative. And they feel like they can use people to do that. Vulnerable people. Trans people are all vulnerable in one way or another. And media outlets like these and organizations like Wolf, they prey on people like that. It's disgusting. I don't want to see anybody get caught up in that shit. And it's sad that we have to fight ourselves in this war for just being able to be ourselves. We just want access to HRT. We just want to live. We just want to pay taxes. We just want to watch 24. We're just normal people like anyone else. We just need a little bit more healthcare. That's it. What did you all think of the story? It's a very long one. I didn't realize we'd be talking about this issue for so long, but it was a good article. I really like this one. I'm very proud to have covered this today. This was important.